The United States currently struggles with an adult obesity rate surpassing 40%. In Japan, that number is 4.5%. This discrepancy exists despite the fact that modern Japanese society is thoroughly integrated with Western food infrastructure. It also defies standard dietary advice. Japanese populations consume massive amounts of carbohydrates, primarily white rice, yet they maintain the lowest rates of metabolic syndrome, visceral fat accumulation, and type 2 diabetes on Earth. A Nutrition Journal study analyzing 132 countries shows a stark inverse correlation. Higher adherence to a traditional Japanese diet equals a lower national obesity rate. This downward trend remains consistent even after adjusting for gross domestic product, healthcare spending, education, and physical activity. The data also rules out a genetic advantage. Migrant studies clearly show that when Japanese individuals move to Western countries and adopt Western diets, their obesity rates rise to match their new neighbors within a single generation. A 4.5% obesity rate is not an accident of genetics or thermodynamics. It is the direct output of a specific, reproducible dietary architecture. The standard clinical model of eat less, move more focuses on thermodynamics and calorie counting. This approach often fails to account for the complex biological pathways that regulate fat storage and appetite over time. The metabolic signaling model offers a more precise framework. Under this model, food acts as a biological instruction set, providing the chemical signals that dictate exactly how cells process fuel. These dietary inputs directly program three primary physiological systems: the architecture of the gut microbiome, the rate of fat synthesis in the liver, and the amount of heat energy the body generates at rest. The traditional Japanese diet functions as a daily biological delivery system, supplying the exact biochemical compounds required to keep these cellular systems running efficiently. We can reverse engineer this anomalous population data by isolating the specific nutritional inputs they consume and examining the exact biochemical switches they flip. Your gut microbiome operates as an active endocrine organ. In most Western populations, a lack of soluble fiber and a surplus of processed foods leave this system inflamed and severely lacking in beneficial bacterial strains. The traditional Japanese diet addresses this daily with natto, fermented soybeans that act as a direct biological delivery system for a bacteria called Bacillus subtilis. The human gut contains two major bacterial phyla, Firmicutes and Bacteroidetes. An elevated ratio of Firmicutes to Bacteroidetes is consistently observed in humans with severe obesity. Introducing Bacillus subtilis via natto remodels this environment, tipping scales towards Bacteroidetes. A Journal of Molecular Nutrition study shows this shift suppresses fatty acid synthesis in the liver, leading to a measurable reduction in visceral fat around the organs. Eating plain, unfermented soybeans will not produce this effect. The physical process of fermentation is absolutely mandatory. Raw soybeans contain anti-nutrients, specifically trypsin inhibitors, which block absorption. Fermentation systematically breaks down these inhibitors, making isoflavones and nattokinase enzymes fully bioavailable to the body. Without the action of the bacterial fermentation process, these nutrients remain biologically locked inside the bean, preventing the microbiome remodeling from taking place. The second mechanism involves increasing energy expenditure, entirely independent of physical exercise, achieved through the traditional consumption of matcha green tea. Before examining the modern biochemistry, we must observe the strict preparation methods maintained by Japanese culture for centuries. The human body contains two primary types of fat. White adipose tissue exists to store excess energy. Brown adipose tissue, or brown fat, exists to expend energy by generating heat. Because matcha is consumed as a finely milled powder of the entire tea leaf, it delivers massive concentrations of a molecule called epigallocatechin gallate, or EGCG. When the concentrated EGCG enters a brown fat cell, it directly triggers an immediate and intense thermogenic response within the mitochondria. The specific combination of EGCG and the natural caffeine found in the leaf upregulates uncoupling protein 1, the molecular switch that turns thermogenesis on. Researchers at the University of Geneva tested this interaction. They observed a statistically significant 4% increase in 24-hour energy expenditure among subjects consuming this specific catechin profile. This line chart maps fuel utilization. The respiratory quotient dropped from 0.88 to 0.85, shifting from burning carbohydrates to oxidizing fat. Testing caffeine alone produced zero effect on metabolic rate. The thermogenic increase absolutely required the unique synergy of the catechins. This confirms that through highly specific dietary inputs, we can instruct the body's adipose tissue to consume its own lipid stores to generate heat. The final mechanism centers on a structural component of the diet, an exceptionally high load of soluble and insoluble fiber derived from seaweed and root vegetables. The Fukuoka Diabetes Registry analyzed over 4,300 patients and found that this high fiber intake tightly correlates with a lower body mass index, lower fasting glucose, and reduced inflammatory markers. When these complex polysaccharides reach the lower digestive tract, gut bacteria ferment them into short-chain fatty acids, primarily butyrate. Butyrate serves a dual biological purpose. Locally, it fortifies the intestinal epithelial barrier, preventing inflammatory molecules from leaking into the bloodstream. Systemically, it travels through the gut-brain axis, communicating directly with the brain to suppress appetite-stimulating hormones. This biological satiety mechanism is fully integrated into the daily domestic habits of traditional Japanese households. Meals are often structured around the Ichiju Sansai framework, which translates to 1 soup and 3 sides, plus rice. This automatically segments the meal into multiple small, high-fiber, moderate-protein dishes. This physical structure supports the Okinawan principle of Hara Hachi Bu, the practice of eating until you are roughly 80% full and then stopping entirely. It takes approximately 20 minutes for short-chain fatty acid satiety hormones to reach the brain. By stopping at 80% capacity, the structural pacing of the meal aligns perfectly with human endocrinology, preventing a caloric surplus before the brain registers fullness. Translating this data into clinical application requires adhering to a specific protocol of 7 foods, while strictly avoiding preparation errors that destroy their efficacy. The targets are exact: 50 grams of natto, 2 to 3 grams of matcha powder, 5 to 10 grams of seaweed, and a daily serving of unpasteurized miso. The application of extreme heat will denature these compounds. Pouring boiling water over matcha permanently destroys up to 60% of the active EGCG molecules. The water must not exceed 175 degrees Fahrenheit. Likewise, boiling your miso soup or purchasing pasteurized miso paste completely eradicates the beneficial probiotic colonies before they ever reach your digestive tract. Modern health culture often attempts to bypass these foods entirely by extracting the active ingredients into pills. This is a clinical miscalculation. Isolating a single enzyme like nattokinase into a capsule strips away the prebiotic matrix, the synergistic isoflavones, and the necessary soluble fibers required for absorption. To replicate the specific metabolic outcomes measured in these clinical trials, consuming the whole food architecture is biochemically non-negotiable. The method of preparation dictates the physiological result. Improper preparation renders the food biologically inert. When tracking metabolic recovery, standard scales are highly deceptive. Instead, measure your waist circumference weekly. A reduction in visceral fat is the true, accurate clinical marker of systemic metabolic improvement. The biological systems necessary to maintain a lean mass, brown adipose tissue, a diverse gut microbiome, and complex satiety pathways are not exclusive to a specific geography. They already exist inside you. Age-related weight gain and metabolic decline are not inevitable coding errors in your DNA. They are predictable responses to poor daily signaling. By delivering the correct evidence-based dietary compounds to your cells, you bypass the statistical failure rates of standard calorie restriction and actively rebuild your metabolic architecture.